Government of Industrial Regulations of the Business Environment. The four major pieces of legislation collectively known as the Antitrust Laws. Antitrust laws are regulations set by different governments which seek to set a competitive business environment. There are four pieces of legislation governing antitrust laws in the world. These include the Sherman Act of the 1890s, the Federal Trade Commission Act, the Clayton Act of 1914, and the Robinson-Patman Act. The Sherman Act of the 1980s was the first legislation in the United States that guided the subsequent antitrust legislation in the United States. The main purpose of the Sherman Act of the 1980s was to protect consumers against exploitation by companies. The act prohibited cartels by firms whose role was to impose high prices against consumers. The Clayton Act defines the behavior of firms that interfere with free trade. As a result, the act identifies four acts by companies that violate the provisions of the antitrust law. These acts include a merger, price discrimination, restraining other companies from engaging in free trade, and assigning market or consumers to firms inconsistent with competitive market forces. Just as the Clayton Act provides specific restrictions of the Sherman Act, the Federal Trade Commission Act reinforces the provisions of the Sherman Act. The act established the Federal Commission, whose sole mandate was to provide policing against unfair competition in the market. The Robinson-Patman Act was structured in 1936 as a remedy to the Depression. This act amended Section 2 of the Clayton Act to allow promotional allowances to a chain store. The act specifically aimed at addressing the issue of price discrimination in the economy. The intended purpose of industrial regulation of oligopolies and monopolies. Oligopoly. Oligopoly is a market structure dominated by a few firms dealing in a particular product line. Firms operating in this market structure tend to formulate cartels to give them exclusive power in setting their market prices. Their acts may expose consumers to exploitation because of the high prices charged for their products or services. No doubt, industrial regulation is essential in protecting consumers against exploitation resulting from high prices charged. Therefore, economic regulation acts enable the country to achieve balanced development by creating an enabling business environment. For example, industrial regulation dictates the prices that oil firms should offer to reduce production costs given the importance of oil and energy production. Monopoly. A monopoly market structure is dominated by one firm. The government may decide to set a monopoly to take advantage of economies of scale. Also, economic regulation sets a monopoly to provide essential public goods. Consequently, industrial regulation in the context of a monopoly market structure serves to not only deter monopolies from independently determining the prices of essential commodities but also to put in place measures aimed at discouraging a market scenario where a monopoly has absolute control over a product, hence killing competition. Many electricity distributing companies in third-world countries, for example, act as monopolies in their own right. However, respective governments provide regulations to prevent them from exploiting customers by setting power prices as they so desire, and also from having absolute control over a commodity, power, that is considered essential for economic growth. The major functions of the primary federal and state regulatory commissions governing industrial regulation. There are many federal regulatory commissions in the United States. Some of the regulatory commissions in primary industries include the Interstate Commerce Commission, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and Federal Trade Commission. The United States economy depends significantly on trade. As a result, the U.S. government has enacted several regulatory commissions to create an enabling business environment. The Interstate Commerce Commission is one of the industrial regulatory commissions that enforce legislation to improve the efficiency of interstate transportation. The commissions seek to normalize any transportation barriers set by states to impede free competition. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, has a mandate to regulate electricity sales in the United States. The commission determines the wholesale electricity rates, and set prices for natural gas, and prices of oil. The commission mainly aims to provide low prices for energy in a bid to spur industrialization, since the energy sector is controlled by few firms, monopolies and oligopolies, and thus high chances of forming cartels to discriminate against consumers. Another primary regulatory body is the Federal Trade Commission, FTC. FTC ensures free and fair competition in industries. Also, the Commission protects the consumer from exploitation by ensuring that monopolies do not subject consumers to high prices. The intended purpose of social regulation of market structures. Social regulations are state laws that address social concerns or problems of consumers. Social regulations seek to protect consumer welfare by addressing fundamental issues affecting society. Social regulations as applied to all market structures are facilitated by the government as well as government agencies, with the intention of compelling companies to comply with issues concerning the environment, labor conditions, occupational health and safety, consumer protection from exploitative tendencies, and labor issues, non-discriminative labor practices, equal opportunity employment, etc. Under social regulations, for example, factories are not supposed to discharge harmful waste into the environment, and failure to comply with such regulations is often met with stiff penalties and legal action. Similarly, food processing companies are required under social regulations to include information about the raw materials used and the expiry date on the labels of the packaged products.